Okay.
We're live.
We are.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of the Daily Sip. We've just been chatting with Nick about the weather in true British style. But I hope you're all, wherever you are in Britain, or indeed, I know we get people watching all over the world, but I hope you're all having a good day. And if it is cloudy and rainy, it's not affecting your energy too much. We were just saying how productive we've been this week as well. But yeah, really going to be quite a different angle actually today. It's going to be really interesting to hear what Nick's been up to, both in his studies and career, but particularly now at Walnut. And as it says on the words there, looking at neuroscience and how it may be able to bring minority consumer groups more into mainstream advertising. But before I stumble over my words anymore, I think it's a great time to bring you in, Nick. And yeah, just be great to give a little bit about your background, and then we'll get stuck into this interesting topic.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so yeah, I work at a company called Walnut Unlimited, like Martin said, and I'm a senior research executive there. I sit within the neuroscience team, but we do. So I work with quite a lot of. I do a lot of this comms and advertising side of things, but as a company, we're broad in terms of we're a full service market research agency. We're part of this wider group called the Unlimited group of other agencies, which have got like PR and marketing and different things and like that. But which we'll get onto a bit later with the stuff.
Sure.
But where we're at today is kind of Walnut's ethos and our slogan, if you like, is being called the Human Understanding Agency. So there's a lot of what we do is based in human behaviour, human psychology. So which leads to my background, which was more based in clinical psychology to begin with. So I studied more in that area of psychology, but there was always an interest in looking at the way people perceive the world and the way our human behaviour is different from one another and everything like that. And from the clinical side, that led to quite a lot of interest in things like autism and the way people with autism perceive the world and maybe have a slightly different way of looking at the world. And I found that super interesting. And I think that almost leads into how I kind of got into this subject that we'll talk about today. But my kind of career from there went from this clinical side to looking into this consumer psychology, where I kind of fell into market research. And within this market research, I sit within the neuroscience team, like I said, so still managed to do all that psychology stuff that I really enjoy, but maybe from a bit more of a commercial perspective. It's been quite a nice route in like that, with having like an interest that's kind of been there for a while, but then taking it into a research sense. So from that research sense, I guess what we do as a company is to try help brands reconnect with people, understand people's human behavior, how that can help their brand. From, I guess, moving into how that kind of led to some of the stuff today, which I might as well move into now.
Yeah, go for it.
Just so we were, as a company, we're always kind of looking at human behavior and the different ways brands are kind of portraying society and the way that people are receiving it. And we began looking at the way that minority groups were represented, and some of my personal interest came into that from the autism side. So I was initially looking at how people with autism, whether there's media that kind of responds to that. I think we've probably seen over the last few years there's more of it with things like cinema, where you have autism-friendly cinema and things like that. But we wanted to look into more communications and advertising, as that's where the business sits. And then that led to looking at the representation of minority groups and disability groups being one of them in advertising. And we found really interesting things in terms of, we found some ads that were doing it really well, and it's having really nice positive effects for the brand, and others that maybe weren't doing it so well.
Yeah.
And
that's the fear, isn't it? A lot of brands are scared that they want to engage and do social good / grow business. It's all from my perspective, it's great that it's a win-win in the case of disability, but there is that fear, right, of doing it wrong.
Yeah, and I think so we'll probably get on to a little bit. I discussed, I spoke at a conference about this subject back in March before everything kicked off.
Yeah.
I got it just in time. No gatherings like that. But it was titled Avoiding Tokenism and how neuroscience can help with the representation of minority groups, because I think what we were seeing when it was done wrong was it was not just being like an ad that was perceived badly. It was almost having really harmful effects for the brand, because people would perceive it as tokenism and representation for the sake of
it,
rather than for it being meaningful. So that kind of led to where we're at today with all that, and I can talk through some of the stuff that I spoke at that conference, because I think it was kind of taken through in a nice way that summarizes maybe where we were originally with advertising and how it's moved, and then why we as a company think that neuroscience is probably, I guess, one answer in terms of there's probably a few factors into trying to drive more meaningful representation in advertising, and also helping brands to feel comfortable with doing it and alleviating some of the fears and concerns, because obviously we've touched on it a little bit, but it's something you said you spoke about, or maybe there's been with the purple goes, that brands are wanting to get into it, but it's obviously a delicate subject, so wanting to do it in the right way.
So for people watching, because some people watching are going to be, very in a marketing world, and like on LinkedIn particularly, and then there'll be some sort of everyday disabled people. I think it's really fascinating for all audiences. But just to sort of summarize, I think what we've got up to now is that, so Walnut is a market research company, and you've got a background in psychology and generally, I suppose, understanding how people think and behave in that general discipline. And that, and because I've always felt like I ended up doing an A-level in psychology after I was back in the world of work. So I did economics and a master's in marketing. So I'd never been in that. I wouldn't have ever thought of doing psychology when I was at school. But it is fascinating when you're into business, you're quite often into psychology, and vice versa, because it is just about that human behavior. So I can totally see how you've ended up those two things becoming one. And obviously, you've touched upon the fact that brands have got that fear, and some did get it wrong because it was perceived as tokenism. So is it fair to say that the difficulty of when brands have got it a bit wrong is they've not been able to understand both what for example, disabled consumers, but also their general non-disabled consumers would feel and react to that advert? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. For me, I feel that it's what we saw when we did a kind of review of a lot of the ads is when it feels like it's been done as an afterthought rather than been done for meaningful purposes. So I guess the idea you talk about is a brand creating an ad and then going, maybe we should include and what we found through, I think the thing with neuroscience is basically the brain is really good at detecting when something doesn't feel natural and real.
So it's kind of like the smell test. People talk about not just in advertising, but that, like, you just know somehow inside yourself when something's a bit off or someone seems a bit off, but it's taking that to more of a science and a measuring perspective. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I think what we'd probably say is that a lot of research still now will focus on someone's maybe conscious opinion or what they say. A lot of the time that's probably influenced by something like the objectivity of research and people kind of the social pressure as well. And people there might be an ad that has a representation of some disability groups and it's not done quite right. and quite often people would be like, yeah, I love the ad that you see there, but deep down, or maybe their kind of emotional or subconscious response would show that they might have a different reaction towards it, which shows the importance of using neuroscience in this sense. I think is getting under that top layer and trying to get the deeper insights as to someone's true opinion towards something.
So could you give an example if a brand has come to you and said, right, we want to do a creative idea, do a advertising campaign, and we want to either target disabled consumers or just be aware that 22% of the population have a disability. So it's going to be a broad campaign, but we want to have that representation. What would you do as a sort of process in terms of how would you use neuroscience to help that brand?
Yeah, so we've got a few of our, what we'd say, neuroscience principles, which we'd help with kind of what we think are the most important things to be doing to make sure that it's an effective piece of communication and doesn't feel like it's tokenism. But then there's also the testing side of it, where we can help to kind of shape it and to make it feel or make sure that we're producing or we're making it so it is meaningful representation, and also producing good results from our measures. So I think that if I start with the first bit about maybe some of the principles, so we talk about the way that the brain decodes information with things like the simplicity of the message, authenticity, and maybe showing empathy. But there's a couple which are probably the most important when looking at this sector, I'd say. That one of the ones I touched on there, which is probably this idea of authenticity, and something we spoke of before. And I'll probably get onto a point that me and you discussed before, Martin, which is about how to drive this authentic, natural feeling. And one of the things that we suggested, and something I spoke about when I did my talk, was including the group being represented in every stage of the process. So whether it be the creation of the ad, the idea creation at the start, the filming, the production, that was a way to make it feel really natural, and that authenticity will come through rather than it being something done at the end.
Yeah.
Another one which I think we touched on is the group being represented. So say you're targeting an ad with disability groups. One of the things at the moment we've talked about is making them almost the crux of the ad, or giving them a prominent role in the story. I think we touched on before the quite famous Maltesers ad.
Yeah.
Where
it's like it's the go-to example, isn't it, of a big ad campaign with disabled people.
Yeah, but it is done brilliantly. It's done really well, and it touches on, or it uses that point I just discussed about having the prominent role in the ad. So the girl that's in the had with the disability is the storyteller, and it's all built around her, and that really helps to for everyone, whether it be, I think, from anyone watching the ad, because everyone responded well to it. It kind of helps to make sure people understand the meaningness of the representation, if you like, and it kind of gives it context rather than something that I've discussed before about it being an afterthought. This ad was built around this idea.
Yeah, it started with that in mind, didn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So I think that's a really nice example of that. The other thing is narrative structure. So we talk about in ads, I think it's a principle across advertising, whether it be with representing minority groups or not, but I feel it's maybe even more important with this one, is the structure of the ad, so people understand the story from early on, so that see why that representation's there. So it's giving it context. One like I say, so one thing is kind of setting that stall up at the start.
It's always not lingering on that, so the viewer doesn't quite know what's going on. It's very self-evident from the get-go what's going on.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is because I still feel we're in this quite early phase where if you see someone with disabilities in an advert at the moment, it's still quite a novel thing.
Yeah.
And it's still something that is not maybe something you see in lots of ads. It's something that might pop up. So at the moment, I feel that the stage we're at is that people might need to understand the context of why that representation's there.
Yeah.
Potentially, it's more of a difficult one to say, because it seems harsh that we couldn't just put that across from the start. But I think we're almost in a phase of moving into it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I mean, obviously, there's been a whole lot kicking off the last week, since you and I last spoke with Black Lives Matter, and I'd imagine that it's the same with every minority group. I am disabled. I work within the sort of disability movement, but it's, in the end, the challenges are quite similar. That for whatever reason, the norms in mainstream society just doesn't understand, or that fear through difference. And as you say, you've almost got to take people through the education and through that journey to get where we all want to be. And it, as much as we want to just do it now, it is a process.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, it's a really nice summary of it. And I think maybe if that idea is then distilled into making the ad, I think that's a really nice way of looking at it, because we almost need to, at the start of the ad, we need people to kind of understand the process there. I think one example was that we've got from a piece of client work that we did was we got given an ad which had two versions, and the ad narrative was basically talking about how everyone goes through all these hardships in their life. Some are different from others, whether it be having a disability or maybe more kind of social hardships based in kind of social constructs. But one of the ads began with a boy with Down syndrome, and the other ad began with I think it was, I can't quite remember the story, but maybe a lighter subject than that initial boy with Down syndrome. And unfortunately, when we did our neuroscience testing, the first ad that we saw, the brain kind of was trying to decode and understand what the meaning of everything was going on there. So we saw initial quite adverse reaction to it. And we looked at this and then looked at the second ad, which the boy with Down syndrome had been moved to a couple scenes later once the narrative of the ad had been understood. And we saw really positive results to it. So that was a really nice example of how the story needs to be explained, and the context needs to be set up so that people can kind of get on board with it, and then be taken through the rest of the ad, if that makes sense.
No, it does a lot. Because when you talk about neuroscience, I have this image of electrodes being on someone's head. Is that going on anywhere during this process?
It is, yeah. So I guess the principles that I've spoken of are kind of derived from a lot of the tests that we've done, and I guess from a lot of academic papers. But we conduct all our research ourselves. So and it is, as you kind of named and imagined, we put a headset on people with these nodes. It's not, I don't know how familiar everyone would be that's listening with a EEG cap, but they have developed a little bit in the last few years from, you used to have to wear a big cap with gel in and all this saline solution. It was quite uncomfortable. But in recent years, we've got these ones that are a bit more consumer friendly, if you like, because we conduct our hall tests off the street, and we just have we have nodes on a small headset. And when doing that, we take people's galvanic skin response, which is basically just a sweat response on their fingers. And from this, then we'll have all the participants take part in that, and that's hall test went off the street, and then from there we get our results, which is some squiggly lines along with the ad playing, and then it's our job to interpret what we think is happening at different scenes, whether it be from the EEG going up and down, and how that relates to the imagery on screen.
And I've not got anywhere near the sort of background knowledge and experience you've got, but from what random things I've picked up, I presume that enables you to look at which part of the brain is lighting up, so to speak, so you know if it's more like the primitive brain. I think there's a more medical word, but the sort of the survival type and the fear and the emotion. And then you've got the frontal cortex. Is that the sort of thinking, analytical part of the brain? Am I anywhere in the right area?
Yeah, no, you're doing well.
Flagging it well.
Yeah, no, that's pretty spot on. So it kind of relates to quite a lot of how we talk about this, in terms of, we talk about the reptilian brain and our emotional brain with all of this. And they're linked in a way that I think this kind of fits to this subject. Is the reptilian brain quite often might show those reactions of like fear, like you said, but we also have our emotional brain and other aspects of our psyche that can override some of the feelings. So we have obviously our ability to show empathy, and our social nature override some initial feelings of fear or aspects like that. So the brain kind of likes to work in terms of predicting behavior. So if just to kind of explain maybe the science behind some of why we might have seen an adverse reaction to that boy with Down syndrome that started, because when we see something that's different from normal, the brain sometimes will show a different reaction. But as we've developed as humans, have this strong ability to show empathy and overcome feelings with our social nature. And when there's capacity for us to reframe certain aspects, then we can show a positive reaction. Which is why I think that example of the ad, which with the two different versions, once we're able to frame the situation and understand it, we're able to show a much more positive reaction towards something.
Because I've been saying quite a lot, it's definitely going to have to get a t-shirt made now with it, but political correctness can be the enemy of inclusion. And that's a sort of general observation I've seen time and time again. But what, coming at it from the neuroscience perspective, it's almost that something's different, and so we don't have that pattern recognition, and so the fear. And then also the point about we do like to fit in, the sort of the prehistoric thing was that we had to be very cliquey and within tribes so we could survive. And if someone says the wrong thing to someone else with a disability, they're probably also scared on a very deep level of being discarded by the tribe because they made a faux pas. And so it's almost that helping those individuals to get that it's safe and it's not going to trip them up and be, thrown out of the tribe. And so I can see that's where it comes back to framing the context. So there's that familiarity, and then the safe space that they can engage without that fear of getting it wrong, which that's why I say political correctness is the enemy, is because there is that worry of saying the wrong thing, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's a perfect description of it. And I think that is a really nice way of putting it, in terms of I think first and foremost, I think these times of during lockdown and coronavirus have shown that we are very social beings. We're social animals in a way that we need to connect with other people, and we need kind of that human touch. And this social nature is like we touched on it. It's able to override a lot of those maybe reptilian brain tendencies. So I think that it's a really nice way of looking at it, and I think is a good thing for people to be aware of, especially with when I guess if you take it into this subject, when producing comms like this, there is this. I guess that's maybe where some of the fear comes from. Fear from brands that we spoke about what the reaction might be about getting it wrong. So it ties into that quite nicely.
Cool. We've got a couple of comments coming in. I thought I'd bring them up. So Gavin, great to see Nick join you, Martin. Looking forward to this one. That was soon after we started, but I thought it'd be nice just to bring a couple of the comments up now. Pippa, and indeed Gavin as well, have both been on the show before, but Pippa's saying, looking forward to watching this back. Sounds like such an interesting topic. And of course we get a reasonable turnout on the live, but a lot of people watch it back afterwards. So as always, if there's not the opportunity to give comments and questions because it's a replay, we'll give details to get in touch with Nick and myself later on. But yeah, it's nice to have a couple of people commenting there.
Cool.
I suppose my next train of thought and question for you, Nick, is because so when we're talking about applying the neuroscience, you've got disabled people as a group of customers, but also how they're represented more in advertising, and then you've got the general consumer base of who are not necessarily with a disability. So would you be using the neuroscience techniques on both disabled, the minority group like disabled people, and the mainstream customer base, or is it more for the mainstream customer base?
Yeah, I think so. The angle we've taken so far, I'd still probably be honest and say that we're in quite early stages of looking into all of this.
Sure, but in theory as well as in practice.
Yeah, I think from what we've taken so far, it's been thing as discussed about in my talk was the benefits of doing this probably to a brand from a general sense, and that's the benefits of. So we talk about brands having personality and showing their human side, and how that could be a really positive thing for a brand. There's been quite a lot of research done into how brand personality is one of the strongest drivers of loyalty. So we're seeing brands more and more show their human side, and I think advertising is one of the kind of the strongest ways that they can do this, showing them to be authentic and real. And I think this has probably been, I guess, from this power shift that we've seen over the last few years, where people are wanting more from brands, whether it be for their consciousness for mental health or the environment, or just make a difference. And I think that has really nice implications for a number of different things, but one of which is the representation of minority groups. So to answer your question, I think that we've probably looked at it from a general sense of how is doing this going to be can be a positive thing for the brands and probably for society. I guess that is because it can be beneficial for the brand. But I guess the flip side of that is it's also beneficial for the disabled community in terms of being able to increase the representation and maybe give a truer representation of society in terms of the number of ads that we see.
And I think it's because I was thinking of like which group, whether it's disabled people or whether it's the main brand customers, whether the sort of neuroscience would be, the research would be done on one or both. But I guess in the end, take Mars, you would want to know that the advert is going to be received in the right way by that broader, not necessarily disabled customers. But then, because I suppose what I'm thinking is you wouldn't want the disabled community to take issue with the ad, even though it was well received by the mainstream. But I think you touched on that you would have people from the community involved in that creative process to make sure you get it right, correct?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of testing, I'd say we haven't done as much testing in that area of testing those with disabilities from the neuroscience perspective.
It's more general insights, though, isn't it, that you would need for the advert? Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. I think from a moving outside of neuroscience, guess from more general research, it's something we do quite a lot from a qualitative point of view with qualitative interviewing, and I think that's probably what would fit more into this idea of the inclusion from every stage of the process, and getting that feedback to make sure it's kind of it's done in a way that feels meaningful.
Yeah, and what I'm saying now about to say is just me, it's thinking out loud, because it's a totally new concept, and as you said, like, it's a newer area for Walnut, and it's got a lot of potential, but it's early days. But yeah, in a way, of the people tested of a consumer base, it might be that 22% of the people that are included in the testing have a disability, back to that reflection of the population of that group in society as well.
I think that's summarized well. I think where the neuroscience comes in is being able to identify the important thing with neuroscience is being able to identify how it's received below that conscious level of below the level we're able to articulate. So I guess because what we do is we then do some analysis of the ad art once it's been produced, and we're given feedback from there, because within our neuro measures we don't ask any questions of anyone, we don't get their opinion, we're just using the
ad.
Sit them down, watch the ad, and using the equipment, and from that then we're able to get the kind of their emotional reaction towards something, that's something they just say. And I just tying that back into maybe how this can help with brands is that that's not always something that that we've been able to do in the past. We haven't been able to maybe someone's emotional reaction to something, whereas now with the use of this, we're able to get kind of their true response, and also see almost scene by scene what's working and what's not. From doing that, then we can be fairly sure that something taken into market is going to be received well.
That's really interesting, because I was thinking of essentially what we're both saying here is that you can do surveys and ask people questions, but there's sometimes what they say and what they feel is different. You just have to look at like polling for political elections. Like the polls say one thing and then the actual results say something else. So you're getting more that true representation, which it's and I was also thinking of like the Steve Jobs kind of views on innovation, that you can ask customers what they need and want, but like no one ever said we want the iPhone, because what you don't know, to state the obvious. So obviously you can get that by presenting new ideas and new innovations and adverts. You're getting that real true response. So there's a lot of cool applications to it.
And I think that's something that I think as a research community we're getting better at including that. I think that we're trying to push that into to brands as much as possible, because there is still a large amount of research that is based in this that kind of what you say aspect and what you can just articulate. But it's something we try to do as a company, as Walnut, is try include this kind of implicit understanding wherever we can, because we feel it's the strongest driver of what pushes people to make decisions, and gives a stronger opinion or reaction to how they're truly feeling, rather than maybe something they're able to articulate. So there's a lot of uses for it. We use it obviously across our research, but I myself and the team think it's particularly interesting for this area, and
agreed,
really want to push it for this area, because I feel it could be the thing that can just help brands and kind of help the whole community, if you like, to move it on the next step. Using those comms which are firstly really engaging and are going to do well, but also the ones that are giving off this true representation, because from our neuro measure we're going to be able to work out whether it doesn't feel quite right or it doesn't feel natural.
Yeah, that makes total sense. One more question and a couple of thoughts sort of going forward in a second, but just a question. Well, first of all, a comment. Is this fascinating, says Paul. I love the discussion about pack mentality and social beings. We are afraid of getting it wrong, and the reaction sometimes pushes people back rather than take things forward. So very much around what we were talking about a little while ago. And then Paul goes on to say, Nick, have you done any research or work where organizations work with their employees with neurodivergence to help solve problems, provide insights and experiences, etc.?
Yeah, so we have a lot of work within the company in that area. I think it'd be good if I speak to you afterwards with that. I think from a neuro perspective, almost like I was touching on just then, we're trying to implement some of this implicit research wherever we can. So neuroscience doesn't necessarily cover, it's not just this brain measure stuff, and we also have other measures like reaction time testing. We measure the speed of someone's response, as a quicker speed is meant to indicate a closer connection in terms of your true beliefs towards something. So we try to use some of that implicit testing in that, and that's a really nice way of trying to help with any subject like that. So yeah, I'd be more than happy to speak to you afterwards about that one.
Cool. Well, yeah, that's come from LinkedIn. So if you go afterwards, Nick, you can connect with Paul on LinkedIn there. So yeah, it's back to what I said. Amazing amount of different applications, I think, is the general gist. Gavin says, great to see Paul on LinkedIn. He is doing great work. So I've not met Paul myself, but evidently Gavin knows Paul. So
looking forward to it.
Connect the dots. So I mean, really my kind of final thought, but like last thoughts around this were moving forward. So like obviously the key to it is that a brand understands there are marginalized groups of consumers that with certain things, whether it's around making goods and services more accessible, having more, diverse employees and inclusive marketing. But essentially, when the more brands are aware of the benefits of inclusion, the more in their benefit to have that represented in their advertising. So once we're at that point, and I feel with disability, the awareness raising's been going on for years, and it's getting more progressed and more forward. In the end, it's brands wanting to utilize this. So what's the sort of general reaction been from brands, and how are you sort of hoping and planning to roll this out more?
Yeah, so I think it probably goes back to that thing we were saying about the alleviating fear. If we can show brands that this isn't an area to be worried about going into, and one of the ways that we can reduce that is through testing your ads, testing the campaign, making sure it's being done right. With our neuro measures, we know that when we get good results, they're good indicators that the campaign's going to do well, and that's going to lead to a positive reaction, whether it be for the business side and sales. So from a quite functional sense, that's something that we feel that that we can help with, and kind of this area can help with. In terms of, I guess, do you have any other ways of asking the question in terms of how it can?
Yeah, I mean, as I said to you before, it's very much just an open-ended thing of, sort of understood the backstory of you and the tools and bringing it all together and where we are today. So, I mean, like reflecting it from my side, that Purple Go, we know that we can use social and influencer marketing to drive real results to brands, and it empowers disabled influencers and disabled customers. But in a way, it's just looking at some of the challenges and the factors to realize that potential. So for me, I'm just speaking to a ton of brands, and gradually there are brands that are gonna have a go at what we're doing and give it a try. And we've already got case studies from disability brands as well. But for me, that's the challenge, and also the opportunity is that the more we get to work with brands, the more we learn, the more results we prove, and so it ends up being a total no-brainer. But at the minute, there is that fear of engaging with disability and with influencer marketing as well. And that's the bit we're just overcoming at the moment. So it was just any kind of thoughts in that area that you've got about realizing the potential of neuroscience in this way.
I think that's the way that kind of Purple Goat maybe going about it, and the what you've experienced is probably similar to us, in the sense that or maybe a better way of putting it is that I feel that neuroscience is a way of stepping in at a few of those stages where it's been quite hard to overcome the hurdles. I think from the initial phases, being able to use the testing to try give this assurance, if you like, that it's going to work, and it's going to be received well. The other thing that, or maybe the outcome of that, which I see is really nice, is that we're going to learn more from the neuroscience side of it, which can then be taken in wider places. But also the way that I think I touched on before is how the neuroscience can probably, if it's going to increase the amount of the representation we see, but it's also going to make it, or help it be done in a meaningful way. Because I think that there's always the worry that we don't want it to just be, right, let's increase the number of ads that represent.
Just for the sake of it.
What we want to be doing is creating campaigns that are meaningful and are done well, and they're done in the right way. And what I personally feel is neuroscience is a way to do that, because we're going to uncover people's true beliefs towards something. Neuroscience principles that we've learned already have able to teach us how to make the stories engaging, and the types of things that we need to do, whether it be through simplicity or empathy. And they're really going to help it to become a campaign that can have wider implications, as well as obviously the more business side for the brand of making the money that they might want to make. But it's also it should have positive effects for the wider community, and the disability community as well, in terms of that meaningful representation.
No, I totally agree. And I think that point I was making before about, it's both of the things that we're working on are relatively new initiatives in terms of not just the practice of influencer marketing or neuroscience and advertising, but just generally all sorts of other factors. I believe we're at a point where disabled people can get more inclusion than ever before because of all sorts of reasons. But speaking to those brands that are more aware but not quite sure, I think it's that the brands that embrace and say, right, we're going to be that brand of disabled people, are going to have so many benefits going forward. It's unbelievable. And I think now the risk of not acting is bigger than the risk before, which was, but what if we do it wrong? And what you and I are saying is that there's still elements, like we're going to be continuing this conversation after today, because I think there's ways we'll be able to work together and support each other, which is really exciting. But when something is new, you don't have all the answers to hand, but that's what's exciting. And I think the brands that embrace that opportunity are going to, in 5 years, be sitting quite pretty as a result of it.
Definitely. And I think as a state of the nation is that we're getting better enough in terms of wanting more from this area. And I think what I spoke about this power shift is that before, if you like, brands could get away with making advertising that didn't give a true representation of society, with like a supermodel actor or whatever. Now we're seeing brands kind of wanting more, whether it be like the stuff I spoke about, whether caring for the environment, or the brand making a difference. And I think, if you like, as a society, we're demanding more from that sense. And that is hopefully pushing the brands along that way as well.
Agreed.
And I think that neuroscience is a way that we can kind of add into that and make sure, I guess, help the brands, but also help the society as well, in terms of making sure that the stuff being produced is going to be done so meaningfully.
Yeah, agreed. And when you were saying that, it reminded me, I read a book a few months ago called Green Marketing, and it was all about how green sort of products and supply chains and all of that world was just seen as a sort of for hippies, and that was it. And then gradually it is that brands that don't have green inverted commas products and services and supply chains will be boycotted by larger amounts of the consumer group. And I feel that, and there's a really good book by Deborah Rue called Purple Marketing, and it's very much around, you know, inclusion of disabled people. The business benefits are just easy to see. I think we're at the point of how do we do it, and it's the neuroscience, the influencer market, there's lots of ways and hows, and that's the bit that's just playing out at the moment. But yeah, I think you're right that the non-disabled customers in 5-10 years won't go to brands that aren't inclusive of all people. And so you're not just ignoring the purple pound, which is 250 billion in the UK. It's a crazy big number, actually. But you're likely to lose non-disabled customers as well.
Yeah, and I think that I guess the other thing that I'd add that ties into that is the brands that do it but don't do it in a way that's done right, and they're just doing it to join the bandwagon, or doing it as an afterthought, which is where I think that the neuroscience comes in, at being able to kind of spot that, if you like. Being able to help with identify that this campaign is going to work well, whereas this one, it does seem a bit like it's tokenism and you're trying to do it to join. So I think that's kind of another step in that point you were just making there.
The sort of how side, isn't it? How do we do it because we actually care, and it's not a cynical, manipulative move.
Yes.
That's so true. Well, I mean, I knew this was going to be a fascinating chat, and it definitely proved to be so. Lots of good thoughts and comments coming in from the audience as well. Is there anything else that you wanted to say that you haven't yet had the chance to?
No, I guess from a business side, I think there's a lot of appetite at Walnut to go ahead with these things. We're having clients come to us, but I think that the stuff that I've covered today is hopefully more food for thought about how, as a business, we can be helping brands. I think that I'm sure me and you, Martin, will be speaking quite often over the next weeks and months about how we can help each other, because I think there's generally something really nice that can come from this. But if people are seeing this and wanting to, feeling that it's something that is interesting them, then I think get in contact with me or anyone from Walnut Unlimited, and we'd be more than happy to discuss anything more about anything that I've chatted about today.
Yeah, that was my last question, really, was how can people get in touch? Because I mean, I think there's obviously the biggest next step is brands getting in touch and looking how to utilize the work and the services and the knowledge you've got. So obviously, particularly on the LinkedIn crowd, the LinkedIn viewers, if anyone's from a brand and interested, get in touch with Nick. But there may well be, because when you were talking about the sort of, when we ask people what they need and want, and we don't always, as an individual, I probably can't always articulate what really matters to me as a disabled person. So I could see disability charities doing a lot of work around understanding and unifying disabled people in the sense of what are the core key issues that matter. So again, that's
it's a whole nother one it's a whole nother hour to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think
it's definitely true that I think it's something we look at a lot with our reaction time testing, is trying to uncover. We'll ask someone some statements about something, get their true beliefs towards something, and you're so right. No, we can't really articulate what we want all the time, or how we truly feel about something. So we use our neuroscience testing to try and cover that. So I think disability charities is a great one in terms of trying to unpick what people are wanting, what people's opinions are on something. So yeah.
If you ask me, as a sort of leader within the disability world at this moment, I would refer to like some of with Corona, there was the stuff about triaging ventilators in healthcare. That's a big concern. They repealed the Care Act under the Corona Act, so there's a lot of worry about independent living, and so that there's a couple of things I'm aware of that I would point to, but I don't know that. It's like that's just from some of the ways I get my information and my media. But it would be very interesting to do a research project and have some of the neuroscience involved in that. I am speaking to one of the big charities Friday, so I will sort of bounce the idea with them and see what comes out of it. But definitely a lot of applications, a lot of different ways. But how can people get hold of you if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, so via my LinkedIn, but also you can email me through nick.saxby@walnutunlimited.com. The other way is just get in contact through our website, which is Walnut. If you just Google Walnut Unlimited or go on walnutunlimited.com, you can find us through there. And I myself would be more than happy to chat to anyone, but there's I can point you in the direction of other experts, because we have a whole social and government team who look after all our charity work as well. So so we have different teams like that. As someone in the neuroscience team, I kind of work across groups and out in different teams, but we have teams by sectors, and one of which is the social and government team. So they have a whole host of charities that they currently work with. So we're experienced in that area, and I can point you in the right direction to speak to those people as well. But if not, I'll probably leave my details on this link for anyone that's coming back at a later time as well.
Yeah, sounds good. Brilliant. Well, thanks a lot, Nick. Really enjoyed today. I think I said we could have talked another hour at least on all the different factors, but it certainly whet people's appetite. And we'd had a couple of chats, but I wanted to sort of get to explore it with the audience at the same time. I think I can sort of ask the questions that other people are thinking when they're watching. So it was really nice that we could get stuck into this topic.
Well, I think if more come from it, then I'm more than happy to answer them, because I think that it's quite hard on the spot to things to come out, and more than happy for things to move that way with it as well, because there are questions and things that probably need answering from this world as well.
And Gavin just said, super stuff team, love my lunch webinars, keep up the great work both. So nice point to end on, I think, Nick.
Lovely.
Cool. Thanks everyone for watching. As Nick says, get in touch if you've got any questions with his email or Walnut Unlimited website, or go find Nick on social media, particularly on LinkedIn. We're back tomorrow. Is it Wednesday today, Nick? I think it is, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah, the days are just a blur. So tomorrow I've got Neha, who runs accessible tourism in India, inclusive tourism in India. So that's going to be quite an interesting one tomorrow. So be good stuff. But thanks again, Nick. See everyone tomorrow. Bye-bye.
All right. Cheers. Thank you.